The council chamber buzzed with the low hum of restless anticipation. Rows of elite Zoran warriors sat at attention, their vibrant, scaled exoskeletons reflecting the dim, bluish glow of the hollow screens. High Commander Virax stood at the front, his imposing figure towering over the assembled soldiers, his four arms folded across his chest. His violet eyes flickered with a barely restrained intensity, scanning the room as he prepared to speak. "This mission will be unlike any you have faced before," Virax began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The room fell into a tense silence, the warriors sitting straighter at his words. "The enemy we are facing may seem weak at first glance, primitive, fragile, but do not be deceived." The hollow screens flickered to life behind him, displaying rotating images of Earth and its inhabitants. The warriors, prideful and confident in their nearly indestructible natural armor, exchanged bemused glances as images of humans appeared on the screen. Thin, pink-skinned creatures clad in fabric, their faces smooth and devoid of armor. They hardly appeared to be a threat. Whispers of disbelief spread through the chamber, some warriors even snickering at the absurdity of it all. "Humans," Virax continued, his tone unwavering despite the skepticism in the room. "Do not let their appearance fool you. I present to you footage from YKN 3, where our reconnaissance force first encountered them." The screen shifted to shaky footage from helmet cams. It started calmly, Zoran troops advancing in neat, disciplined formations through dense forests. But then the footage descended into chaos. The once orderly advance crumbled into frantic skirmishes as unseen forces attacked from the trees and underbrush. Explosions erupted from nowhere, and the audio filled with the panicked shouts of Zoran soldiers as they were overwhelmed by swift, elusive figures. The camera caught glimpses of humans darting between trees, their faces twisted with fierce determination. One clip showed a human soldier, heavily wounded but still charging headfirst into a Zoran line, his bloodied form almost a blur as he closed the distance with astonishing speed. The screen flickered to black as the human tore through the Zoran ranks, a final burst of gunfire silencing the chaotic screams. The room fell silent. The smirks and lightheartedness had vanished, replaced with a creeping unease. Virax's eyes swept across his warriors again, his voice low and menacing as he continued. "The humans possess something we have never encountered before. They are driven by a relentless will to survive, and their small bodies hide a ferocity that defies reason. They fight beyond pain, beyond logic, and do so with a savagery that has brought low some of our best warriors." Virax paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The humans rely on tactics and agility. They use their environment as a weapon. They are not to be underestimated." A grizzled warrior, Cortal, stood from the front row, his scarred exoskeleton glowing faintly under the chamber's light. "With all due respect, High Commander," he growled, "are we truly to believe these fragile creatures pose a serious threat? We have faced empires, decimated entire star systems. They are weak. They wear cloth where we bear armor." Virax's eyes narrowed, and with a flick of his wrist, the hollow screen shifted again, displaying a human far different from the ones in the earlier images. This human was clad in strange, adaptive armor and bore weapons of unknown design. He was larger, more imposing. Unlike the earlier depictions, this soldier was a walking arsenal. "This was taken by a drone on Earth," Virax explained. "Our scouts have confirmed that not all humans are the same. Some are larger, more dangerous, but we do not know much about them yet. I advise you all, remain vigilant." The room buzzed with discomfort. Cortal's earlier confidence had faded, though he remained defiant. "If these larger humans exist," he said slowly, "why have we not heard of them before? Is this not just a myth, a fabrication to instill fear?" Virax's gaze bore into Cortal. "That," he said quietly, "is what we intend to find out." The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Though many still harbored doubts, there was a shift in the air. For all their strength and experience, the possibility of an unknown threat weighed heavily on their minds. They had faced countless adversaries, but never had they faced a species capable of surviving against such overwhelming odds. "We leave at dawn," Virak announced. Prepare yourselves for the unexpected. This enemy is not one to be taken lightly, no matter how they appear. With a curt nod, the High Commander dismissed them, and the warriors rose from their seats, their demeanor more subdued than when they had entered. As they filed out of the chamber, there were no more whispers, no more smirks. Instead, there was only a grim determination, a quiet tension that settled over them like a shroud. The protagonist, Zar, lingered behind, his mind racing. He was one of the youngest warriors, though his skills had earned him a place among the elites. The footage had shaken him. He had never seen anything like the humans before. Their tenacity, their unpredictability, it stirred something inside him. Doubt? No. Something closer to curiosity. Zar watched as Cortal exited the chamber, still radiating confidence despite the warnings. For the first time in his career, Zar felt uncertainty gnawing at him. Was this the enemy that would finally break their streak of victory? He shook the thought away and joined his comrades, boarding the sleek, metallic transport ships that awaited them. As the doors closed behind him, he couldn't help but glance back at the planet hanging on the hollow screen, Earth, a world that appeared so small, so insignificant in the grand scale of the universe, yet filled with such defiance. And so, the Zoran fleet prepared to launch, unaware that they were flying into a storm far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The Zoran landing craft touched down with a muffled thud, its landing gear sinking slightly into the soft soil of the forested outskirts of a small human settlement. The airlock hissed open, releasing a thin veil of mist as the elite warriors stepped out, their armor gleaming under the pale sunlight. Zar stood near the front of the formation, his senses on high alert. The forest around them was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of wind through the leaves. Only silence. Cortal moved confidently at the head of the group, his massive form cutting through the dense underbrush with ease. "Remember your training," he barked, not even looking back at the warriors behind him. "We move swiftly, strike hard, and finish this before they even know we're here." Zar's grip tightened on his weapon. There was something unsettling about this place. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, as if the very planet resented their presence. He scanned the trees for movement but saw nothing. Still, the unease lingered. The settlement came into view through the trees, small, unassuming buildings clustered together with narrow dirt roads winding between them. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic, but Zar knew better. The footage from YKN 3 replayed in his mind, the image of the human soldier charging through the forest with unrelenting ferocity. Cortal raised a fist, signaling for the formation to halt. "Prepare to advance," he growled. The warriors spread out, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Then, without warning, the forest came alive. The first explosion ripped through the ground near the front line, throwing 2 warriors off their feet and sending a shockwave of heat and debris through the ranks. Before Zar could react, a hail of gunfire erupted from the trees, catching the Zoran warriors in a deadly crossfire. The air filled with the sharp staccato of gunfire and the low hum of energy weapons discharging. Zar ducked behind a nearby tree, his heart pounding in his chest. The humans were everywhere, appearing and disappearing with almost supernatural speed. He caught glimpses of them moving between the trees, blurred figures in dark, form-fitting suits, their faces obscured by helmets. "They're in the trees!" one of the warriors shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "We can't see them." Cortal roared in defiance, standing his ground even as bullets ricocheted off his armor. "Hold the line," he bellowed. "Do not break formation." But the formation had already disintegrated. The Zoran warriors, trained for direct, disciplined combat, were no match for the humans' guerrilla tactics. Zar's mind raced as he struggled to process what was happening. They had been prepared for a straightforward assault, but this was chaos. Another explosion shook the ground, and Zar was thrown to the side, his body slamming into a nearby boulder. Dazed, he tried to push himself to his feet, but his vision swam, and his ears rang from the blast. He could hear the screams of his comrades, the sounds of battle growing fainter as the humans continued to strike from the shadows. A figure loomed over him, one of the human soldiers, smaller than he had imagined but radiating a lethal intensity. The human raised a weapon, and Tsar braced himself for the end. But the killing blow never came. The human hesitated for a moment, staring down at him as if trying to decide whether to end his life. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the humans vanished into the trees, leaving the Zoran warriors disoriented and broken. Tsar lay there, breathing heavily, his mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. They had been outmatched, outmaneuvered by creatures they had deemed inferior. His pride felt shattered, replaced with a cold, creeping fear. As the smoke from the battlefield began to clear, Tsar pulled himself up to a sitting position. Around him, the surviving Zoran warriors were regrouping, tending to their wounded and searching the trees for any sign of the humans. Kortal, battered but still standing, looked furious. His pride had taken as much damage as the rest of them, but he was not one to admit defeat so easily. "They think they can toy with us," Kortal spat, his voice filled with rage. "We'll show them what it means to face a true warrior." Tsar said nothing, staring into the dense forest, wondering what kind of enemy they had truly awoken. Tsar limped through the wreckage of the battlefield, his vision blurring as pain rippled through his body with each step. The dense forest that had concealed the human ambush was now littered with the remains of his comrades, their once proud armor twisted and broken. He could hear distant echoes of fighting, scattered gunfire, the sharp crack of explosions, but it felt far away, as though he were walking in a nightmare. The forest cleared, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood a lone human, massive and imposing, his armor black and sleek, reflecting the dim light filtering through the trees. He held a rifle casually in one hand, but it was the calm in his posture that sent a chill down Tsar's spine. This human exuded an aura of complete control, as if the chaos of battle could never reach him. Tsar stopped in his tracks, heart pounding. This was no ordinary human soldier. He was far larger than the one Tsar had faced earlier, his presence almost predatory. The tales of larger humans, dismissed as exaggerations, now flooded Tsar's mind with grim clarity. The sight of this human made those tales feel like gross understatements. The human turned his gaze toward Tsar, his face obscured by a helmet but his intentions clear. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't need to. Tsar could feel the unspoken challenge hanging in the air between them. An offer to fight, but on the human's terms. An offer Tsar knew he could not refuse. Summoning every ounce of strength left in his body, Tsar squared his shoulders and raised his blade, its edge glinting with a faint, cold light. He charged, roaring in defiance, a battle cry echoing through the clearing as he lunged at the human. The human moved faster than Tsar had anticipated. With a fluidity that belied his size, the human sidestepped the attack and swung his rifle like a club. The impact sent Tsar sprawling across the ground, his blade clattering out of reach. Pain exploded through his chest, but Tsar forced himself to stand, to face his enemy. The human approached slowly, his footfalls deliberate. Tsar could see his reflection in the human's visor, small, broken, defeated. But pride would not allow him to fall without a fight. He lunged again, this time with his bare hands, but the human intercepted him effortlessly, gripping Tsar's arm and twisting it behind his back with a precision that spoke of years of training. Tsar let out a pained growl, struggling against the human's hold, but it was no use. The human held him in place with frightening ease. For a moment, they stood there in silence, two warriors from different worlds, locked in a final confrontation. Then the human spoke, his voice low and calm, though Tsar could not understand the words. Whatever he was saying, there was no malice in it, only certainty. The human's grip tightened slightly before releasing Tsar with a shove, sending him stumbling backward. Tsar staggered, gasping for breath, his mind racing. The human could have ended him in that moment, but chose not to. Was it mercy? A message? The meaning eluded him, but one thing was clear. This human was toying with him, letting him live only because it suited him. The human turned his back to Tsar, as if the fight had already ended. Rage and humiliation flared in Tsar's chest. This was worse than death. This was being deemed unworthy, a nuisance, not even worth finishing off. Desperation took hold, and Tsar stumbled toward his fallen blade, intending to strike one final blow. But the human's reflexes were too fast. In an instant, he spun around and drew a sidearm, firing a single shot. Tsar froze as the energy bolt seared through the air, grazing his shoulder and sending him crashing to the ground. The pain was searing, but the worst of it was knowing he had failed, utterly and completely. From his position on the ground, Tsar watched the human holster his weapon and walk away, disappearing into the forest without another glance. He was left alone with the fallen, his pride shattered and his body broken. As darkness crept in at the edges of Tsar's vision, he realized the true nature of the humans. Their strength wasn't just physical. It was their unpredictability, their willingness to adapt, to use both brute force and restraint when necessary. They were not bound by the rigid codes of honor that defined Zoran warriors. The last thought that passed through Tsar's mind before he lost consciousness was not of hatred or vengeance, but of fear. The humans had more than earned their reputation, and this, he knew with chilling certainty, was only the beginning.